Good morning, friends, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I want to say that although I am from the so-called civil society, I have great respect for the much maligned bureaucrats who design this, the laws and even more the delivery systems and the people, thousands of bureaucrats who are delivering all these great things, in our country to such huge populations. So I really, it's a very unenviable task, and we are so, people from civil society are so ready to criticize everything the government does, but it's a great job they are doing, including our friend Harsh Mandir, who has had to deal with this in such detail. But then, we also want to think of some long-term issues, and being a farmer, I often ask myself, where are we going about food security and so on. And I want to also say that we are all often forgetting that agriculture is about food. Even farmers have forgotten that. Even farmers think that agriculture is about money. And the consumers, people who are eating 3 meals a day, especially as they're becoming more and more urbanized, they really, when they eat, they're not thinking about where it is coming from. They think it's coming from the shops. Somebody has to grow this. So that often we have a very strange collective amnesia, and we really need to, that's an important barrier. As he was saying, there are barriers to this, and we need to get over this barrier. I want to bring attention to a very small place where I'm living for the last 25-30 years, doing farming and observing and dialoguing about food and agriculture. But I'm sure if there are farmers in this audience, they would say that, yes, this is what is happening in my place too. And this is a place which is not a very well water endowed kind of place. It is near Tirupati, 50 kilometers from Tirupati. But then, there are many such places in India which are not water endowed, well endowed. And agriculture always has to be seen along with water. There are different regimes in our country, which it's like, water and agriculture are like lovers. They have to, some people may like fat spouse, some people may like lean spouses, but no plant can live without water and soil moisture. And dry regions have developed their own, evolved their own ways of making enough food with lean water regimes, and that is the kind of place I come from, and there are many such places in India. So the important thing to remember in this context is that farmers are very reluctant to buy food and eat. That's what I have noticed. If there is a cow and if it goes dry, they'll go rather without milk than to go and buy food. They're so used to growing their own food that buying food has always been, there's a great reluctance. There was a lot of reluctance, and it continues to be so. It kind of, how can you go and buy food? If it is there, so they keep adjusting with whatever is there. If there is lots, then they eat more. If there is less, then they eat less. If there are only one kind of thing available, then they do with that. And earlier, cash is, even now, cash is meant to be spent on luxury or on needs which cannot be fulfilled locally, like allopathy doctors, English medium education, college fees, whole lot of plastic, aluminium, steel, wares, furniture, machinery, footwears, clothes, mobile phones, motorbikes, and so on and so forth. So I find that there's a great deal of reluctance to actually go and buy good food. Cash is sort of meant for luxuries or any other needs which we cannot we cannot make ourselves. The only exception to this rule nowadays I find is the meat on Sundays and festivals. That is, in our place at least, is readily bought and eaten. So there's a sense of well-being attached to meat food or sweets. If you might have noticed, there'd be a whole lot of sweet shops which have come up in the last few 1 or 2 decades. And meat and sweets are very often seen as something, is a luxury, but we would like to rather have them, kind of thing. So I find that even if a son is earning comfortably, the money would be saved to build a house, to perform marriages, to buy gold, or for health emergencies, but not so much on food. So in this village, I would sort of divide the time span of, let's say, 50 to 100 years into 3 periods. One is what I call Bullock period, the pre-electric pump set up to 1970s. And the second period is the borewell period. And the third period is the Enriga period. I find that the pre-electric pump set period up to 1970s, people are always reporting plenty of water, first of all. Plenty of water in ponds, tanks, lakes, fields, wells and soil. And wells supplemented surface irrigation, and wells had 30 to 60 feet of water, just below 30 to 60 feet. And although only 1/3 of the lands got assured irrigation to grow paddy and sugarcane kind of wet crops, there was enough soil moisture to give good yields even in rain-fed crops. So a very wide variety of crops were grown in both wet and dry lands: paddy, sugarcane, banana, coconut, vegetables under assured irrigation through tanks and wells. But jawar, bajra, ragi, maize, korra, arikalu, pulses, whole variety of pulses, 5 to 6 pulses. Some of them you may not have even seen today. Something like same, in which you take only the seed and eat. Cowpea, horse gram, moong dal, black gram and so on. And oil seeds were mostly in our place, peanut and sesame. And vegetables, whole lot of vegetables, including, people were addicted to palm. So including palm and tobacco in small quantities would be grown, and a whole lot of green leaves freely available from surroundings. And farmers are always experimenting. They even experimented with beetroot, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, and that kind of new kind of vegetables. And herbs and spices, chilies, onions, garlic, turmeric, ginger, betel leaves, tobacco, milk and meats. Where meat was highly preferred food. Every family had cows and bullocks and buffaloes. Buffaloes especially for milk, but cows and bullocks were always there, and there was always, since there were no milk marketing outlets at that time, all the milk was consumed locally as milk or as buttermilk. And sheep were raised both for dung as well as and sheep manure is very highly valued, and sheep meat was highly appreciated during special occasions. I remember the inauguration of the school in my Harijanwada, Dalitwada, meant that a sheep was cut in my house, which is actually an upper caste house, and the whole village was, fed. So sheep meat was highly valued, and poultry were raised for eggs. I'm saying all this may be very self-evident or obvious, but for people who might have lost touch with rural areas, for us, it's common, obvious. But for people who have lost touch with rural areas, I just want to tell you the range of foods available and what was considered highly valuable. And they were all, nobody thought that you have to spend money. If somebody came, just go cut your own chicken and feed. Or if there are a lot of people, if there's a festival, then, cut your sheep kind of thing, So poultry was raised for eggs and meat. Fish was available for free in paddy fields, not only in ponds and lakes, but in paddy fields. And the rule was that the morning time up to lunch, whatever fish was available, you put in a pot, and that is for the owner. From afternoon time, after lunch, whatever fish was available was for the workers. So, and even Dalit agricultural workers had, cows and bullocks and sheep and poultry, and they were the only ones to eat beef, and they ate beef quite frequently. And apart from that, and even till 80s, beef was 5 rupees a kilo, and chicken or poultry and mutton would be something like 60 rupees, 80 rupees, like that. Today, they are both more or less the same, just 10 rupees difference. So they have to buy beef also, at a fairly high cost. Apart from this, there were wild pigs, deer, rabbit meat were a luxury for hunters, and specific communities and families ate specific meats. Like the caste of Bengal sellers ate cat meat, and the tribals ate birds, and some Dalit families ate field rats. And my worker tells me that, field rat is as good as mutton, like that. And they ate termites during monsoons. And many families ate mushrooms during rainy seasons. So the range of foods available and grown, and since most of it never had any marketing outlets, they're all consumed locally. Then I just want to also tell you about how there was year-round cropping, starting from June to next June. There was no time left. All the time there was something or the other was coming, something other had to be planted, something was ready for harvesting, something had to be weeded. The continuous work. And women had their hands were very full. I always found them working. In fact, they won't have time to cook and eat. There was so much work. And all the food processing, I also want to say that cooking, we often think food processing as something different from cooking. Cooking is actually food processing. You can't eat paddy or brinjal straight from the plant. You have to make it into rice, then you have to make it into food. So this food processing was being done 3 times a day and throughout the year with no holiday by these women. And so, there was both jobs, employment for people who were landless, and for people with land, there was more than enough work. I just found them working all the time. The only difference was that they were not rushing like in the cities, but they were sort of working in their leisurely pace, but all the time work. So practically everything was consumed and shared locally. Very little was sold, and whatever cash came in, they were all tucked away as gold for both to be encashed as in emergencies as well as as a status symbol. The Boral period. I just want to show you the one or two slides how the water situation changed. Can you take something that can help me with this? Yeah. So this is now up to 1970s. There were this many wells, sustainable water usage. The water was collected through the through this water lifting bullocks. And now during 80s and 90s, just see how many bore wells have come. Before that and after that. And after after we went through all these bore wells, this is how water situation became in 2002. All those bore wells which were there during this time, which is about 200, came down to again 59 functioning wells. So this period, this is the period when there were two developments. The electric pump set to lift water is truly literally a watershed for the village. The 70s not only witnessed the electrification of pump sets, but also introduced the concept of cropping for cash. In our area, sugarcane, milk, meat, and mango became the main cash crops. From then on, water started depleting gradually but surely. So the main thing is that the discharge of water from groundwater became more than the recharge. And our area is typically, geologically, it is what is called a hard rock region, in which water doesn't go on percolating. It's beyond a point, the water actually comes up. It can, because there's a layer of hard rock into which it cannot percolate easily. But this borewell, during the borewell period, we were going beyond this permeable region into the hard rocks and mining water from pockets of water, and the water kept disappearing, and whatever rain. So from 30 feet, last year somebody drilled to 700 feet and no water. So the thing is that we have from 30 feet to 700 feet means that we have drilled water 20 times more. But then we can't expect rains, 20 times more rains. In fact, if rains come even double of what we are, what is the normal for that region, there will be floods and there will be breaches. So the amount of mining of water which we are doing is absolutely, so even by 2000, a study was saying that we are already in India 25% more, food production was 25% more through mining of groundwater. So 75% of India today is dependent on groundwater mining, groundwater irrigation, and at least 25 to 35% is through mining water unsustainable. So this is and rain, because why is it happening? Because farmers have found that the only way to get money is to grow assured irrigated crops and through these so-called cash crops. Government has been repeatedly, not only government, I mean all the experts, all the economists, they have been urging us to grow cash crops and to shift to horticulture perennial crops. And the cash crops and horticulture crops, especially in a water limited regions, but even in places where water is plenty like Punjab and Haryana, and in Andhra Pradesh, the delta areas, food is disappearing, cash is also not coming, and employment is also going. When you shift from food crops to perennial crops, like say mango or eucalyptus or subabu plantations, then there is no employment throughout the year, there is no work. So that is, and when the farmers are also feeling year-on-year losses, so and the workers are also becoming more and more conscientized, and they are demanding their rights. They are no more, subordinate and subservient. So let's put plantation crops, and the plantation crops. Then so to avoid workers, they are doing plantation crops, but the workers, agriculture workers, cannot be on hungry stomachs. So the more they do it, the faster the workers are disappearing. So there is an acute shortage of workers to grow all these annual crops, in fact. So it's a vicious cycle, and this is another thing that people don't understand, that agriculture is a very human enterprise. You can have forests, for instance. They are best left alone. Nature will take care of them. But agriculture is all about human attention and human effort. So, and both the farmer and the worker are extremely important. So you can see the water and agriculture over the decades in this slide. The number of wells have actually, there's been a peak and then they've come down. Area under irrigation actually has simply stagnated, and the 10-year return on investment has actually come down drastically. So this is the story from 70 to 2000, 70s to now, and then this 2006 onwards, the NREGA period came, and personally, I think this NREGA is a day later than sooner. It should have come much earlier, because the Dalit, mostly the agriculture workers are from Dalit families, and they really needed both a much higher wage, definitely. But if it's because the farmers' incomes were coming down, there was this great reluctance and there's a lot of antagonism against NREGA. It's quite strange, actually it's quite mixed. The marginal farmers actually are finding that the NREGA is another escape route for losses in farming, and they're doubling up as NREGA workers as well as trying to farm their own lands. But in the meantime, what is happening is that workers are going as contract laborers to navigating to places where there's assured irrigation and better incomes, and places like ours, regions like ours, these dry regions, so-called dry, and they're becoming drier. What used to be plenty of water and now becoming drier. They are having, they're having these plantation crops and no workers kind of thing is happening. So actually what is happening now is people are becoming poor people, and in our village everybody has taken a white card. There is nobody without a white card except me. So they're all going, their dependence on the PDS has in fact become more, and the PDS supplies about 10 days of rations, rice. And nowadays in Andhra Pradesh they're also supplying some small amounts of pulses and oil, and of course kerosene. But then, I mean, that's, as Harsh was saying, people are adjusting to what the PDS can give, and whatever they are buying, they're keeping to the absolute minimum. So they buy rice, and they buy little else. except for that, you know, a sense of well-being has to be there. So on Sundays they go and buy meat, or on festivals they go and buy meat. But on other days they adjust with whatever is available locally, like the greens and so on. But all those food items which they were growing have actually disappeared. So the Andhra Pradesh macro data about nutrition, I don't want to go into too much of all that, except that anemia among women has actually increased from half to 1/3 in 2005-06 from 2000. So in just about 5 years or 6 years, it has actually grown from half the population to 2/3. It's sort of alarming. The other thing about children, you know, they're all there. I don't want to go into them because. So I want to instead talk about what questions are being thrown up by my experience and the data I have shown. Should I grow as a farmer? Should I grow or should I buy food? Farming has become so unviable because cost of cultivation is always higher than the returns, and year-on-year losses. So many farmers just feel that you actually save money keeping the land fallow and buying the food rather than growing it. There's not only returns are less, but farming is, you cannot do it alone. You have to need workers who will become your workers, either your family labor, or you have to hire them. And all the children, actually after this, in the last few decades, what is also happening is that year-on-year losses in agriculture has meant farmers feel that there is no future in agriculture, and they are educating their children with a vengeance. And today in my village, there is nobody below 40 years. And all the children have gone to residential schools. All the children. Even a 10-year-old. So this is what is happening. So I just want to conclude by just flagging some issues. So this, from self-grown to purchased food, you know, even obviously even the best PDS scenario or the ICDS, they are all doing their bit. And in Andhra Pradesh, people are conscientized enough to demand better services. But can it be enough? And you know, can they also, today actually wages are supposed to be much better, and even in real terms, but can they play the market in such a way that they can fulfill this kind of nutritious food by buying? Then women I find that they are losing both on employment and on cash. If food crops are not grown locally, they have neither employment nor cash nor food, and increasingly food processing is also being done by machinery in the mills. For instance, the Tatas are today, all of you must be buying coconut oil from Parachute company, you know, the Parachute brand. So actually, why should coconut oil be made by the Tatas? So this is so there's need perhaps for bringing food processing into local areas, and especially into the hands of women, which again means new trainings, and because a lot of machinery, so they need to not only technical trainings but also how to manage these enterprises, how to work collectively, and so on. Again, perennial horticultural industrial crops in place of annual food crops. So, decadal growth of workforce in agriculture has predictably declined in Andhra Pradesh from 2.28 to 0.37 to 1.32. but the rate of growth in employment in non-agriculture sector has also declined from 3.8 to 0.47. So all these people are coming out of agriculture. Are they really getting absorbed in non-agricultural occupations? That is something we need to think about. At the national level, shortage of pulses and oils is a well-known fact. But if this trend continues, would we become a net importer of food? Many countries have, after they have taken to export-oriented growth, have become net importers of food. Are we moving towards the same situation? Today, actually, 250 million tons of food grains is quite a consolation. And but then, can this continue with land being diverted to non-agricultural purposes, agriculture workers fleeing to cities, and water shortages becoming worse than before? There's a view that areas which are suffering from water shortage should use their scarce water resources for industry, forestry, and other services and domestic purpose, rather than grow food, which takes up on an average 1,000 liters to produce 1 kg of food. In fact, this is rapidly happening even in rural areas. Today, actually, farmers in our village even are finding more profitable to sell water for drinking water purpose or construction purposes than to grow food. And you know, there is no end to selling water or selling early on when we had just moved to the village. People used to keep on coming for some support and help for cash. And our Tauji, he told us, you know, whenever somebody comes and asks for cash, give food, plenty of food. How much can they eat? They'll eat double of what they're used to eating, but don't give cash, because there is no end to cash. So that is a reminder to us that today we might be thinking of cash support by the government, but then you know, there is no end to cash. The more cash supports you give, I think we'll just need a lot more printing presses. And you never know, you know, every village may start having a printing press to print money. So culture, I just want to stop here. I mean, I don't want to go on. I mean, people can read maybe. There are also other issues like, you know, India has become a very high water scarce country. Can you see that map? Except for deserts, Sahara Desert, Gobi Desert, and the Middle East. India is, where there is very little population anyway. But India, as a highly populated country, is extremely water scarce. And we are bursting. Can we even move populations to less water scarce areas rather than import food? Should this become part of the WTO negotiations, that people also can be moved, not just trade in goods and services? Something to think of for the future. But in the short term, even as the bureaucrats are trying to come up with the best legislation and delivery systems, we need to think about how the long-term sufficiency and security can be, food security should be built through agriculture, and that cannot be done by starving the farmers. Thank you very much.